New information fired from the force. We told you about a Kennewick cop who lost his badge after a domestic violence arrest.
But he's not the only cop to get canned in our area. Action News investigated how often local law enforcement end up on the other side of the law and lose their jobs because of it. Action News reporter Chelsea Copta is live in the studio. She dug into the numbers. And Chelsea, how often is something like this happening?
Well, Mike and Sabrina, I can tell you in the grand scheme of things, it does not happen very often. I talked to all three local departments, Kennewick, Richland, and Pasco PD, just to get a handle on how cops are committing crimes. One problem with the firing numbers is many officers quit before a court can convict them.
Even the best with a badge can fall from grace.
He was probably one of the better officers that we have here. Unfortunately, this off-duty incident came up and ended his career.
Kennewick cop Frank McLean had a spotless record. That is until Coeur d'Alene cops arrested him on domestic violence charges. After an investigation, KPD told McLean to turn in his gun and his badge.
Obviously, when something like this happens to one of our members, it's not something that we're happy about or proud of or anything else, but we feel that the community needs to know what's going on.
This isn't the first time KPD had to cut one of their own. In the last 5 years, the department fired 3 people.
Police officers are held to a very high standard. It's difficult to enforce the law on your off-duty time if you're breaking the law.
It's a high standard that caught up with Pasco and Richland police departments. Pasco police would not divulge just how many were fired, but say no officers were fired for committing a crime. Richland PD only fired 1 person, and the department says it happened back in the 80s. It wasn't because of a crime, and he eventually got his job back.
I think the vast majority of police officers, not only on this department, but if you look at other departments, are genuine, solid, good officers. And unfortunately, just like any profession, you're always going to have a few people who make mistakes here and there, and they're going to have to pay the consequences for those mistakes.
Now, there are already some rules on the books for keeping track of law enforcement. For instance, domestic violence cases within the department are required to be reported. There is a paper trail for every officer that is hired and fired in this state. So if a crooked cop leaves one department for another, I'm told chances are the force will find out about it. The other thing to remember is the state is always a regulator. If there's a case where a backwards department doesn't discipline one of its own, the state can always step in and decertify that officer. Live in the studio, Chelsea Copta, Action News.
Some good information to know, Chelsea. Thanks. And just to be clear, officers can be fired before they're convicted of any crime, and just because they're fired doesn't mean they're guilty. Former KPD officer Frank McLean has his day in court this April.